What rules have you set for yourself that govern the way you live your life? You probably have some moral rules, guidelines for how you treat the people around you. But I want you to go smaller. Think about one thing that you do every day. You wake up and you brush your teeth. Throughout the day, hopefully you drink some water. And even if you don't actively recognize it as a rule, you probably have some idea about what you should and should not eat. When you walk into Commons, you go right for the salad and skip the pizza. Avoid the desserts and the ice cream. Make a choice to go for the grilled option instead of the fried one. Maybe you track calories or macros using what data Bon Appetit provides on their website. Fair enough, right? We all do it. But the problem is, what we know about food and rules is deeply flawed. Nutritional science began when scientists discovered that diseases like scurvy and beriberi were caused by vitamin deficiencies. Now, the foundation for nutrition is that diet causes disease. If we can control what we eat, we can control our health. And that foundation has been seen in every single rule that people have developed for themselves in how they eat. Now, it's not fair to say that what you eat doesn't matter at all for your health and well-being. It does. The problem is a lot of the rules aren't based in firm scientific fact. The field of nutrition has been tainted by bad dietary data, pseudo-quantification, and financial incentives to sell us all a solution to our health woes. Take, for example, a 2017 study titled National Analysis Using National Databases Reveals a Positive Association Between Dietary Fatty Acid Consumption and Laziness and Diabetes in European Females. That's a bit of a mouthful, so let's break it down. What is a dietary polyunsaturated fatty acid? You would know that as vegetable oil. The answer that this study gives us about our bodies is that eating things like fish or foods cooked in vegetable oil will make women lazy, TV-watching diabetics. So let's talk about how they actually conducted this study. The authors of this study used national data, and they tracked how 11-year-old girls reported what they ate and how much TV they watched in a day. They found that for every 1% increase in saturated fat consumption, there was a 4% increase in the number of 11-year-old girls who watched more than 2 hours of television a day. Now, let's start with the reporting of what you eat. The thing is, we know that people are actually really bad at remembering everything that they eat in a day, particularly when it comes to portion sizes. Now, the authors of this study, they lumped all polyunsaturated fats together, despite evidence from a study that these same authors conducted that showed that different polyunsaturated fats have different consequences for your body. The authors found no correlation between vegetable oil and obesity, no correlation between vegetable oil and diabetes, despite the name of the study, and no correlation between vegetable oil and perceived laziness in European women above the age of 25. It's important to note that this study was partially funded by egg and dairy farmers, people who want you to eat more eggs and dairy, which contains saturated fats. A lot of what we know about food comes from the people who are willing to pay to prove it. Now, if you've grown up in the last 30 years, from the 80s, the 90s, or the 2000s, you definitely heard that fat is something that's bad for you. It was a belief spread by the federal government. It was adopted widely in the healthcare system. It was a belief that dominated the American public. But where does this idea come from? That if we can just eat less fat, we will be less fat, and then therefore be healthier. Well, a man named Ansel Keys conducted the world's first multi-nation epidemiological study, known as the 7 Nation Studies. Key examined the proportion of fat calories that different cultures consumed, and based on different regions, came to the conclusion that countries who eat less fat are healthier than countries who eat more fat, like Western countries. Keyes found a direct correlation between the amount of total serum cholesterol ingested and the levels of hypertension, heart attacks, and stroke in different cultures. The problem? Well, Keyes didn't account for the fact that different cultures have different cultures around work, and that some types of work have much higher activity levels. He didn't account for the fact that all 22 nations he required data for, well, they didn't reveal the same patterns. And he didn't account for the fact that one of the countries he posited as the healthiest in the world, Italy, was examined during the period of Lent. Now, Italy is one of the most Catholic countries of the world, and Lent is a period when the majority of Catholics abstain from the consumption of red meat, a major source of cholesterol. Now, this assumption has been relied upon in dietary culture in America for over 40 years. We've shifted to cut out fat entirely, but Americans aren't any healthier. Type 2 diabetes has actually increased by 166%. Heart attacks are still one of the leading causes of death. And that's because it rests on the assumption that everyone should eat one specific way in order to maintain one specific weight. Now, there's not a lot of evidence to back up that assumption. There's not a lot of evidence to back up that weight is actually a good indicator of health. There's very little correlation between weight loss outcomes, even when weight loss is successful, and reduced hypertension, blood pressure, diabetes, or stroke risks. Weight loss is a $50 billion annually industry in the United States. It's $50 billion that American consumers are trying drastically to spend in order to come to a solution that has been posited to us as the answer to all of our health woes. But it hasn't worked. And it hasn't worked because the evidence shows that even when weight loss is successful, a greater desire to lose weight is actually correlated with greater negative mental and physical health. So, what does this all mean for how we can fuel our bodies effectively? The thing is, there's no one-size-fits-all approach for food that's going to fix your health woes. There's no one diet that will make you live forever, despite the claims of people who are trying to sell you a solution. Pay attention to your bodies, what feels good for you, and try and find balance in your life. That's the one food rule I can get behind. Are there any questions from the judges? Yes. Okay, so the question was if I advocate for getting rid of food labels. I don't necessarily advocate for getting rid of food labels. I think we can be smarter about how we label food and think about it more in terms of the whole dietary realm of your day instead of just one individual food. And I think a lot of times what we look at on food labels can have moral connotations for people. And I want to get away from the idea that food is bad or good. Food is fuel. Yes.
I think in any scientific field there are good studies and bad studies.
Yes.
Are you suggesting that in this particular area there's more bad studies, unusually large number?
So I'm not a scientist, and I haven't looked at I can't claim to have looked at every single study in the field. That's a little bit beyond an 8-minute speech, I believe. But I think particularly when it comes to nutrition, because the foundations of a lot of nutrition in our society are very Puritan, and they come from a lot of very Puritan perspectives about food and morality, there's a lot of assumptions that underlie how we operate around food, and I think that's something that's very hard to counteract when you look at the field of nutrition as a whole. Thank you.